sometimes start a little earlier in the morning. I don't know that we're going to need to do that necessarily. We do have 4 o'clock item scheduled today, but it's committee discussion, and I don't think it needs to take very long. But keep an eye on the agenda, keep an eye on your tablet, just in case we make any changes. And Patricia, I'll ask you to send out a text to the committee if there's any reason that we need to assemble on short notice. And, recognizing that people will need to, if they're not nearby, if they're not in the building, if they're, still at home, that we won't be able to, get together all that quickly in some cases. But I don't think we'll be meeting any earlier than normal in the morning. At least that's the plan. So we have, in case anybody's keeping track, we have not passed a bill out of this committee this session. And we've got 9 bills possibly that we could move before the end of the week, which seems like a Herculean task, but we've done most of the work on most of them. We're still taking testimony, obviously, this afternoon on several, and then even tomorrow. But we've gotten practically to the point, I think, where we could vote out 2 of them. These are the Wood Products Manufacturers Bill with that language that we looked at from the LURB and A&R last week. Ellen's coming in this afternoon to just show us that language in bill form. We're not going to vote on it today, partly because we won't have everybody here, and because the bill is in the House Environment Committee this week for a flyby. And since it's in their section of title, we need to give them that. Likewise, the Municipal Regulation of Agriculture, we will look at revised language there today that really just cleans up what we looked at last week. And again, that's in a section of title that belongs to House Environment. So we need to give them the opportunity to look at it. They are taking testimony today from the agency, Ag Agency. And then later in the week from the LURB, from the League. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that moves forward, and we'll be voting those out before the end of the week. Along with everything else, any other bill that you wonder, we talked about this, we've taken testimony, are we going to be able to do it? I'm hopeful that we can, probably with some changes in some cases. And we'll have a chance to discuss all those before we move forward.
What title is the municipal regulation?
That's Title 24.
And that's a
land use.
House environment one?
Yeah.
It's not municipal.
Yeah. GovOps is also
Okay,
has that bill, and I don't know if they've got it, if they've scheduled, but they've been looking forward to seeing it too.
And did we figure out the right to grow food side of things, or is that?
I think so. Yeah, I hope so. That seemed to be the easier part. And we're taking testimony from homeowners associations on the right to grow vegetables bill. Also, that's tomorrow morning. Richard.
On the municipal regulation of ag. Is that did we or can we change the language? I know the league cities and towns said as long as farmer's there, farmer's grandfathered, and just make sure it's grandfathered with change of use.
Yeah.
So if it goes from a dairy farm to a beef farm, or a dairy farm to multiple smaller vegetable farms or something, or diversified agriculture farms, that should be allowed as well. Farmland is farmland.
So today we have Ledge Council coming in with that at 3:20. I think that the language we have now does what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
But let's ask that question, make sure that that's clarified.
Along those lines, I can't remember what happened to the bill that had to do with, was it John McCain's vineyard in Montpelier?
Current use.
It was a current use
Yeah.
bill, but it was the same kind of thing, because it was continually agriculture, but he was getting dinged
Yeah,
just for change of ownership.
yeah.
So-
I think we solved that for him last year.
Okay,
I've seen him a couple of times and he hasn't brought it up. So that might be, yeah.
that's sort of a parallel example though, as
Yeah.
long as it remains
It's appropriate.
agriculture.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a current use I testified on today downstairs at Senate Ag, and there's something that we'll see how it goes, and if it gets out of there, it gets stuck on our committee bill, or we do something to stick it on their committee bill, and if that hasn't been taken care of for him.
That might be,
So it was the same type of thing, ag is ag is ag, and
right,
quit jamming us up.
yeah,
So, in addition to those, so those are two bills that we're gonna see the markup today. And then in addition to that, just today, this afternoon, we're gonna take testimony next on 403, that's the minimum wage. Then we're gonna hear testimony from the Infant Nutrition Council on, the baby food bill.
536.
Yeah. Then after a break, we're going to hear testimony on the rodenticide bill from Cabot Creamery. Then we will have Ledge Council in, and then as time allows, we'll have some committee conversation about the Paraquat bill and how we might move forward on that. So I think without further ado, let's invite Maddie up to the table from NOFA to share thoughts on H403. This is an act relating to fair labor standards and housing standards for agricultural workers. We've had testimony, you'll recall, from Migrant Justice and from the Farm Bureau. We had asked other farm organizations, NOFA, the Dairy Producers Alliance, which sent us written testimony. Maddie, thank you for coming in person.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, committee members, for taking the time to hear from me on this bill today. For the record, Maddie Kempner, Policy and Organizing Director at NOFA Vermont. I don't have any slides to share also. I'll just start with that. So there's no need for technical assistance of any kind, thankfully. We are grateful for the committee's attention to this legislation that takes important steps toward repairing longstanding injustices in farm labor law whose history is based in and whose present day application too often reinforces structural racism. As an organization working for an economically viable, ecologically sound, and socially just Vermont agricultural system, we see the well-being and just livelihoods of farm workers as inextricably linked to the health and vitality of our communities, farm businesses, and the land on which we all depend. Our steering committee, made up of 7 Vermont farmers across a variety of farm types, scales, and geography, guides our policy work as an organization. They have considered the provisions in H403 and provided input that is directly informing my testimony today. First, on the question of removing the exemption for minimum wage for farm employees, input from the committee signaled clear support, and NOFA Vermont would like to formally support this provision of H403 as an organization. Normalizing agricultural wages and aligning them with modern labor expectations is a bare minimum step, and the alternative is to continue to devalue the labor of our farmers and farm workers. Some quotes from our steering committee members on the topic of minimum wage. As far as I can tell from our experience, this is what farms need to offer to be competitive enough to find folks to work for them. Almost everyone I know is paying considerably higher than minimum wage already to compete with other jobs. Like others have said, to have the capacity to actually find people to hire, we've been paying substantially above that for a while. And finally, even the high school kids expect at least 15. Regarding eligibility for overtime pay, our committee's feelings are slightly more nuanced. In general, the farmers we spoke to want to be able to pay overtime and believe that this standard should also be updated to align with labor laws outside of farming. At the same time, there was broad acknowledgement that the realities of profitability, especially for small scale farms, make overtime pay challenging or impossible to afford for many farm business owners. As one farmer put it, we are often trying to fix one aspect in isolation when really the entire food system needs to be overhauled to elevate farmers, farm workers, eaters, and the earth. Our committee members also expressed concern about the creation of a 2-tier system wherein H-2A workers are treated differently and recommended that the legislature be savvy about the H-2A program in order to avoid negatively impacting seasonal workers who also deserve fair treatment and who are critical to so many Vermont farms, including organic farms, I should say. While there are concerns about farm employers' ability to pay overtime, several farmers on our steering committee expressed that 60 hours also feels like too high a threshold for overtime to kick in. As one farmer put it, finding a number of hours that is fair to folks who are asked to work extra when things get crazy and is doable to a farmer who has a slim margin is a hard one. The fact that lots of farming involves doing all the work at certain times also makes it hard. Part of the challenge farmers have expressed, and many are already working around voluntarily regarding overtime pay, is the dynamic that farm employers may choose to hire more employees at fewer hours each if overtime pay were required, at least at certain thresholds, as a way to keep their labor costs down, thereby potentially reducing an individual employee's take-home pay. Our committee members also looked at overtime rules for farm employees in a number of other states and came across a couple of examples I wanted to share with you all today. I just want to express my gratitude for these brilliant farmers that in this conversation sort of stumbled naturally upon two laws, one in Colorado and one in New York, that reflected specific, ideas that they had raised in ruminating on how could we make overtime pay work. So just want to lift up appreciation for all these folks. Wondering whether it made sense to advocate for seasonal exceptions to overtime pay during peak harvest season, or a higher hour threshold during peak season and a lower threshold for the rest of the year. We came across a Colorado law that puts specific overtime rules in place for what they define as highly seasonal agricultural employers. And I am probably going to stumble over my words as I read this second part, so bear with me. In Colorado, as of 2024, highly seasonal agricultural employers, meaning employers with at least twice as many employees in an up to 22-week peak season compared to the rest of the year, are required to pay overtime after 56 hours worked per work week during any up to 22 work week period, or multiple periods totaling up to 22 weeks that the employer designates as its peak labor periods, and otherwise after 48 hours worked per week. So this system in Colorado at least attempts to account for the seasonally higher workloads on certain farms while ensuring workers are paid overtime if they're regularly working more than 48 hours outside of non-highly seasonal situations. Another farmer was imagining a system where the cost of paying overtime during peak periods was spread out across broader society to reflect the essential nature of the work and the ways in which we currently undervalue farm labor. This led us to look at New York's farm employer overtime credit, which requires overtime pay for farm employees at thresholds starting at 56 hours. That was for 2024 and 2025, decreasing to 52 hours in 2026, and gradually phasing down to 40 hours in 2032. Eligible farmers paying overtime receive credits for that overtime that they submit for when filing tax returns, and an advance payment can be requested in some circumstances, which our committee found really helpful, that it's not always just after the fact, but you might be able to actually get that money ahead of time. Also to note, one of our committee members really directly expressed gratitude that in New York, this is really a credit where the farmer is essentially paid back that overtime money from the state, as opposed to a loan or a tax credit or some other means that they felt would be less helpful. Both of these examples struck us as meeting particular needs or addressing particular challenges that were surfaced by the committee in our conversation, and as such, we wanted to make sure that you were aware of them in considering the overtime issue. Lastly, on the question of farm workers being surveyed about the safety and adequacy of their housing during regular farm inspections, our committee expressed support. There was also a desire for some type of financial support or other incentives for farmers who need to make upgrades to employee housing, in addition to and including continued funding of the worker housing loan and grant program that currently exists. Beyond the scope of this bill, but worth mentioning, was also a desire for support from non-regulatory Agency of Agriculture staff who could support farms and answer questions related to things like HR, payroll, and OSHA standards, including tackling Schedule F questions and basics like earned paid time off for full-time employees. And I'll just name that I think those issues that I just mentioned are ones that often our smaller scale farms sort of struggle to feel like they have the capacity to understand or get support around, but that they would really like to get more support around in order to make sure that they're supporting their employees as best they can. And then lastly, I'll just say these issues are ones that farmers in our membership and community are thinking about all the time. And I appreciate your committee's attention to this and your time hearing my testimony. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, how many farmer members does NOFA Vermont have?
I'm gonna have to give you an estimate. We have about just over 2,500 members total. And I would say of those, about 1,000 are farmer members. Yeah.
But anyone who's not a farmer, I could
Yes.
become a member at a different category, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but we have about just under 800 certified organic producers in the state, all of whom are members of NOFA.
And are there other organic farmers who are not members?
Not
Substantial numbers anyway.
Not many, if any, who are certified by VOF. There are other, I should say, there are organic operations in Vermont who are certified by other certifiers. A smaller number than are certified by VOF, but there are some.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you. Patty, over in New York, you talked about they get that investment credit on their overtime. They also get an investment credit for any investments they make on their farm. So in other words, over in New York, if you build a $2 million farm, it's now 25% investment credit back, not a tax credit, a check.
Mhm.
So that's $500,000 on a barn, and then you go buy 1,000 heifers to fill it. At $4,000 a piece, you get 25% back. We don't enjoy the same thing here in Vermont. I doubt we'd even get a investment credit back on our overtime here in Vermont. The problem I have with this bill, and we pay 90, not counting high school kids, 96, 7, 8% of our employees get paid substantially more than minimum wage. And then if you work the housing into it, they are way above minimum wage. As you know, housing is at a robust cost, even if you figure it at Section 8 value. So I'm not entirely sure of the problem we're trying to fix with this, but unlike a store, unlike a restaurant, unlike a business where your wages go up, you can charge more for your product out the other end. In my world, we can't charge more for our product. Anyone in the milk world can't charge more for their product. And, your organic dairy farmers, unfortunately, right now are caught between a rock and a hard place because of last year's drought. It's terrible, devastating for them to buy that feed and have it trucked in from Iowa and Colorado. And I'm aware of that. And I worry about them. And, I don't know about the vegetable world much. If their costs go up, if they can charge more for their vegetables on the other end, perhaps they can. I don't know. But I know in the dairy world and in the meat world or anything else, it's like logging. You get paid the price that they offer you, and you pay for the trucking on the way in and the trucking on the way out. And diesel fuel just went up over $1 a gallon, and they're gonna hit us for that. And fertilizer, which your world doesn't know about. Well, they do have some fertilizers. You've got that Chilean nitrate, which is a great product. But and I don't know if that went up, but I'll tell you, my fertilizer went up 40% last week. So it's a harsh reality out there right now. It's a hard pill to swallow. Anyways, that's my rant. And I didn't know if you were aware of the other benefits New York has to their farmers.
No, I wasn't. And that's really interesting to hear. I appreciate you filling me in. I'm
Yeah.
certainly not an expert on any of these programs. These were just two that we found that specifically directly responded to suggestions that our committee
Yeah.
members had, and just thinking creatively about how to get around this problem. And actually, when it comes to the overtime issue, one of our farmers specifically said, as an example, can I pay 1.5 times the amount I would normally charge for this bunch of bok choy, when knowing that it was harvested during my employee's 42nd or 41st hour of their work week? No, I cannot. So it's not the same as shipping dairies by any stretch in terms of the constraints around the pay price that you're offered. I do absolutely understand the point you're making there. But I think especially when it comes to the overtime issue, our committee felt really similarly constrained by the extent to which they can pass on those added costs to people who also, for whom we want food to be affordable and we need food to be affordable. So. Right.
Other questions? Representative O'Brien.
Just to comment on this too, is like dairy farmers are, if you were a restaurant and you were selling it for $10, your hamburger for $10, somebody else next week is telling you to sell it for $8. So you don't even get to stay even. But maybe I was wondering, that law passed in New York, you know?
Yeah, it's on the books.
Okay, so, and it's now being followed.
It's being followed, and it's being phased down over time. So Ray kicked it in January 1st, 2024. And so it was at that 56-hour threshold for the first 2 years, and now it's at 52 as of January 1st of this year. And it's
When you hit the overtime.
as far as when the threshold kicks in. So they set a specific, and a lot of states, I think, have done that, sort of like gradually decreasing threshold for overtime, where it was set at, it kicked in at 56 hours for the first 2 years. And then for the second 2 years of implementation of the law, it's now set at 52. So if farm workers on one of these qualifying farms are working more than 52 hours at this point, the farmer is eligible for a credit for those overtime hours. And I can't tell you all the minutia of like who's eligible and not and all those details.
No, I just wondered if you'd seen budget figures, because,
How much it's costing New York.
yeah, if New York is finding the money, right?
That's a great question. And also I understand different state, different tax base, a lot of different considerations there.
Not more dairy farmers.
And to be honest, our steering committee member who proposed something very much like the New York law was suggesting that it be done at a federal level. But I think it's hopeful still to our committee to see, states that are taking creative approaches to this. And I think we would encourage Vermont to look at creative approaches too, that really address, the hardship that can be for farmers, but also our desire to really compensate farm workers as a professional labor force that they are. I think that's really important to us as an organization, because we see that our farmers are really being expected to hold that standard, and they want to be able to hold that standard. And I don't actually think we do ourselves favors by allowing a loophole that doesn't really value farm workers fairly like everyone else.
I was thinking also that how much, Richard, you might know, just fair market is controlling farm worker laboring, because, on the way here, there's a sign that in South Royalton at the 110-14 crossroads that says, hiring carpenters, starting wage $35 to $45 an hour. So dairy farms, we're very aware of losing, employees.
That's why. And part of our workforce is also very aware of what they're paying in New York. So you get hey, boss, we need to have a chat. So, and you have a chat, and if you value your workforce, you pay them. Absolutely. Absolutely. Also in New York, they are though, when they butt up against that overtime, and it was 60 hours last 2 years. It was 60 hours.
Well, that's not what I read
Yeah.
in New York
I
State.
think originally it was 60, so it might have been 2 years ago.
Oh, maybe in 2022.
Yeah.
First year.
Yeah, and they're backing it down, but they're also adding on more staff. So they can, and some of their workers are now being upset because they were working more hours, making more money. And then they got back down in hours and back down in hours, so they don't have to pay the overtime.
We had quite a bit of discussions on this in the agriculture labor task force, and which Sophie Zadotny, Ledge Council staff, she had just joined Ledge Council. She was pretty up to speed on it at the time, and she's coming in tomorrow. We could ask her to dig it up again. But I think that part of the problem was that it was a threshold that was coming down, so that for a while, at least to start out with, it wasn't so onerous, but then it came down to 56, eventually heading to 40, and that's going to, you're just sort of delaying, you're gradually moving into a new system that's going to be either more money coming from the state or farmers saying, I don't want you to work more than 40 hours because I can't afford that. So that was, it seemed like an innovative approach, but not necessarily like, oh, this is the ticket to solving the problem. You mentioned H2A workers. I just wanted to be sure I understood the concern that you were raising there. This was also on, so 2 tiers. We
Yeah.
didn't want to create two tiers.
Well, I think part of the concern also, and I'll just say, like, this was voiced by our committee, none of whom I think directly themselves hire H2A workers, but they have, farmers that they know who do hire H2A workers. So I want to be clear, like, this isn't coming directly from that experience, but there was expressed a concern specifically around overtime, actually, about how that could negatively impact H2A workers, and that seasonal workers come here and they leave their families for, some period of time, and they really want to be able to make as much as they can during that period. And so the committee's part of their concern that was expressed around H2A workers was setting up a system where that would end up reducing their overall take-home pay. If we put rules in place that would make it so that farm employers, in lieu of paying overtime that they couldn't afford, reduced everyone's hours, that would be, in some cases, particularly devastating, I think, to H2A workers who are here kind of with the express purpose to make money on farms and then bring that money back.
Yeah.
So that was one of the specific points that was raised. And then I think also just making sure that the other concern was just making sure that the legislature really understands the interplay between any rules that we set and the federal rules that govern H2A workers and that program, so that we just aren't setting up, a system where H2A workers are negatively impacted, or where we have, rules that are tougher for domestic workers, in kind of in either direction. We just want to make sure that those unintended consequences are not happening.
Representative O'Brien.
Just a clarifying thing, Maddie.
Yeah.
How could anything we pass here affect H2A because they're as far as I understand, they're totally following federal guidelines, and we don't preempt federal guidelines.
I guess that's true. And maybe there are not things that we could do that would negatively impact them. I think it was just a concern that the committee expressed to make sure that we really understand if there are interplays. I mean, housing is a part of the H2A rules, as I understand it. And there might be situations where there is housing being provided both for H2A workers and domestic workers. And, are there situations where some consequence of passing overtime, for example, would make a farmer able to pay overtime, but then not able to provide housing? And then would there be impacts that way? It was just more of a thought experiment that we should really look into those rules and think it through carefully.
I mean, my one comment, Richard, in your dairy farmer world is that if everybody's paying pretty much over minimum wage right now, would it make any difference? I mean, we could do it as a show of support in some ways for what Maddie and her stakeholders was talking about to have a minimum wage.
And so what problem are we trying to solve if the majority of farmers are paying over? And do we put a farmer out of business that is just holding on? And I don't want to put a friend out of business. And I don't know what everyone pays for wages. The big farm in our area, I know. But I suspect I have a lot of colleagues in my business that don't pay themselves minimum wage. I do support the housing piece. If we can work with what was that group, the Vermont Farm Labor Housing Group, or DHCB or whatever.
Housing conservation.
Yeah, and and help better the farm worker housing. And farmers have used that program, and it's a great program. We got to find funding for it again.
Dave, are farmers considered farm workers if there was a minimum wage law for farm
Yeah.
labor or not?
And the statute exempts, so currently state statute exempts agriculture workers from minimum wage. The draft that we looked at exempts farm worker families as well, so a spouse.
Immediate.
Maybe it's broader than that to include parents even, I'm not remembering. But And students, so students would still be exempted from paying overtime. And that's the case across all industries. So that would not be a carve out for agriculture. That's existing law. Representative Basel.
Yeah, so I was just looking back to the testimony we got from when Migrant Justice was here. And now the data is a little bit old because it came from a 2024 survey. But what they had said at the time was that only 13% of the people that they surveyed were getting minimum wage. The median salary at that time was $11.67. And certainly the impression we had, I got from the testimony that they gave was that was continuing, that a majority of the people that were being served by Migrant Justice as farm workers are not getting minimum wage.
We heard, again, I'm going to go back and sorry for,
Yeah.
it's almost as hearsay, but I was there. I was chairing the Ag Labor Study Group. And we heard the same testimony, and there was a considerable amount of discussion for what it's worth about the validity may not be the right word, but whether it was representative, whether their survey had, in fact, whether that was a reliable number. There was a lot of discussion about it. Not to say that it was or wasn't, but just that there was a lot of discussion. And then the other, I think, thing that we heard in testimony a couple of weeks ago from the Farm Bureau was they had done a survey and they had a percentage also that was different. I think from both of those two pieces of testimony that we can conclude that it seems like there are some farms, some employers in agriculture who are not paying minimum wage at the moment, just based on those two surveys that we've heard about. I'm sorry, Representative Lipsky was next, I think.
Yeah. It's marginally relevant, but I was fueling up at about 5:10 last night for diesel. And there was a pickup truck fueling a portable heater. And I got chatting with him because they were on a different pump. He was an organic bee producer from Vermont. And he had two H1A employees standing there.
H2A.
H2A,
Yeah.
both from South Africa, taller than any of us, two young ladies. And I said, where are you fueling up? He said, we're on our way. We're leaving for Florida from the gas pump to pick up bees. And the company was named Sotheby's Honey from a town called Morrisville, Vermont. And I talked to these workers and they were both, they come every year. They're Afrikaner, they're Caucasian, or they had German first names. Very love coming back here. And this farmer was saying how important he depends on that.
That program.
But that's all I'm saying. And they were about to drive 1,500 miles and fuel has just gone up $1 for the diesel. So I only put in 31 gallons, cost me $200. And I just shut the pump off. I wasn't gonna fill up, but this guy's doing a 3,000.
They're following pollination north.
They're picking up hives and bringing them back. Their hive
Okay.
They
colonies.
spent the winter in the
Yeah,
south.
and I talked about our committee and we take a lot of testimony about this, but so he sent me a message. And I have a contact. You don't know if he's a NOFA.
Sotheby's sounds familiar. I don't know them personally.
It's not like Sotheby's though.
Yeah, yeah.
Sotheby's,
Important.
B-A-Y-S is his name, but his company's
Yeah.
called Sotheby's, B-E-E-S.
Mhm.
I mean,
Sounds like a club.
anyway, just, it was amazing when you run into peeling up, you know, it's relevant, sort of thing.
Representative Brigham.
That's all, I'm kind of new here, but in all this stuff like what Richard was talking about, the housing you provide for these employees, that doesn't even figure into the wage business.
There is so Ben, you can answer that if you want.
I don't know the details, to be
So-
honest.
So maybe, and we can ask Ledge Council tomorrow to clarify that, but there is a dollar amount that I think with the Labor Department testified on this last week that a farmer can deduct from the wages using a Vermont specific amount, and it is arguably not equivalent to fair market value of the typical housing unit.
That was just my clarifying question. In your study committee, was there ever a figure that came up, you know, sort of median wage plus housing?
Yeah, I think that we heard from the Department of Labor last week, $96 a week. And so that over the course of a 40-hour week, I think that's how they came up with that number, but I'm not certain. It might have been some other number.
Is that just H2A or?
That was specific to H2A, yeah. But I think that the law is written in a way that it would also apply to any farmer who is providing housing, that they can deduct that from wages.
That's state or labor, is that the
State.
So if that figure was raised somewhere near market value, that would make quite a difference.
Yeah, and then question was how do we arrive at that value? But that would be, yeah, that would be a question we can ask tomorrow to Ledge Council. Maddie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate your testimony. All right, we've got testimony. Now, if the committee is prepared to switch gears to H536, this is what we are calling the baby food bill. Craig is joining us, and Patricia. Hi, is our next witness joining us in person or via Zoom?
In person. Is he in the room? No. Yeah, he confirmed that this morning, actually, that he
Okay,
was coming in person.
okay. Well,
He just,
Oh,
I'll just check email in case.
okay, well, we'll just take a quick look and make sure he's not outside the room. Oh, okay, good. We're all set.
Got your lasso there, Jed.
So maybe we're early. Yeah, I'm the clerk, Jed, that's your seat, sir. Also a doorman.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today.
No, we're glad to have you, and we'll let Representative Lipsky come back to his seat, and then
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I apologize.
and Craig, I don't know whether have you been in this committee before, or are you a regular visitor to the State House?
I'm not.
You're not, okay. So welcome, and thank you for joining us in person. We're the House Committee on Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry. As I think you know, we've got a bill, an act relating to toxic heavy metals and baby food products that we've been considering. And we are, we're good for the next half hour or so to
Okay.
hear your testimony and probably ask you some questions.
That'd be great.
Is there anything that you'd like to broadcast, put up on the screen, a presentation or slides or anything?
No, I provided Patricia, kind of a longer written statement and a little bit of a sort of landscape, international landscape. And so I think that was in the folder. So I don't have anything
Okay.
to share.
That makes things easier. So,
Yeah.
well, if you would like to introduce yourself for the record and then you can jump right in.
Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, my name is Craig Fellner. I am the Director of Government Affairs for the Infant Nutrition Council of America, for the record. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. I appreciate it. Inca represents several of the leading domestic manufacturers of infant formula. For more than 50 years, Inca has advocated for optimal infant health and the critical role of infant nutrition supported by families in their feeding decisions. Infant formula is the most highly regulated food in the U.S. food supply, and Inca members take the commitment to deliver safe formulas to the most vulnerable population very seriously. Quality assurance activities are implemented throughout all of our production steps to ensure full compliance with applicable national and international regulations to maintain the highest standards of safety and quality. The comprehensive quality testing that infant formula goes through before it's released is the most extensive of any food category. Our industry already tests for heavy metals as part of the longstanding commitment to provide safe, high-quality infant formula products. Our products comply with heavy metal standards established by the European Commission, a joint WHO expert committee on food additives, and Codex. In addition to our testing under international standards, there are current FDA regulations that help guard against high levels of heavy metals in infant formula. The FDA's Infant Formula Good Manufacturing Practices and regulations established under the Food Safety Modernization Act require that manufacturers conduct a hazard analysis and establish risk-based preventive controls, including of raw hazard materials such as potential for heavy metals contamination. As part of these obligations, infant formula manufacturers identify potential risks for heavy metals and monitor heavy metals across raw materials and finished product batches. Heavy metals in trace amounts have always been a part of our diet. They exist in the environment and may be absorbed or ingested by plants, animals from which ingredients, including infant formula, are sourced. Heavy metals are found in fruits, meats, seafood, and yes, even human breast milk. This is why infant formula manufacturers have protocols in place to reduce the presence of these substances and ingredients to ensure that any trace levels in finished infant formula remain safe for consumption and satisfy all the relevant regulatory requirements. While Inca appreciates the intent of HB 536 as currently drafted, we think it overlooks important differences between infant formula and the baby foods covered in the heavy metals legislation in this and in other states. Infant formula is already highly regulated under the federal law in a way that no other baby food is. According to the FDA and industry testing, heavy metals are present in infant formula at trace levels that are far lower than those that have been reported in many non-formula baby foods. Indeed, the FDA stated in March of 2025 that its recent testing, quote, did not indicate that heavy metals are present in infant formula at levels that would trigger a public health concern, unquote. Moreover, the FDA is still in the process of determining action levels for heavy metals in infant formulas, unlike non-formula baby foods. The FDA announced its intent to set formula-specific action levels in March 2025 as part of their Operation Stork Speed, an effort that we support. And just recently, the Department of Health and Human Services announced that it will publish a report in April of 2026 addressing cadmium, mercury, and lead in infant formula, a precursor to setting federal action limits. To date, all the states that have adopted similar statutes for baby foods have chosen to exclude infant formula from the requirements at least until FDA issues action levels. California, for example, amended its bill to include infant formula finding, or to exclude infant formula finding, quote, merit to the concern, unquote, that posting quantitative test results were, quote, where, quote, the FDA has not yet adopted guidance, unquote, could, quote, cause confusion among consumers on how to process information that is presented, unquote. This in turn could conceivably lead parents and caregivers to resort to alternative feeding options, such as homemade formulas, that do not meet FDA safety and quality standards for complete nutrition in infants and lacks the nutrients necessary for infant growth and development. We are also concerned that including infant formula in HB 536 would require infant formula to bear a statement about, quote, toxic element testing, unquote. This word toxic is not only inaccurate as it relates to trace levels of heavy metals in infant formula, but potentially alarming to parents. Again, the FDA has stated that heavy metals in infant formula do not, quote, indicate a public health concern, unquote. Absent such a demonstrated concern requiring formulas to bear the word toxic might mislead parents and caregivers into thinking that these products are unsafe and or jeopardizing infants with alternatives that truly are unsafe. We do not recommend any actions that might unjustifiably erode confidence in U.S. infant formula products, inadvertently threatening infants' health and further straining the availability of safe infant formula products that meet FDA regulatory requirements. Further, it is worth noting that any product label changes required to comply with Vermont law would functionally require Nationwide as retailer partners determine product distributions, not infant formula manufacturers. This too counsels in favor of keeping the original text of HB 536, which mirrors the approach taken by California, Maryland, Virginia, and Illinois. Thank you again for letting me drop by and testify. I'm honored to answer any questions that y'all may have at this time.
Thank you. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Chair. Greg, Maryland is ready to come forward with I believe in January of 28. So we've heard infant formula reporting requirement. And what we're looking to do is not supersede the FDA in any stretch. We just thought maybe it'd be nice. And baby food's already there. You scan the QR code and up it comes, and then parents can make informed decisions. And appreciate that infant formula is, follows the FDA and they're below the levels deemed toxic or hazardous or whatever word you want to use. But some of us feel that it would be nice that parents could scan it, because they have choices. And they could scan and look and just like you could with Gerber Beech Nut or the other products out there, you could see what their levels were in that batch. And we realized it would take them time to put their model into place. Of course, they all called up Gerber, they'd get a pretty good model to follow. When I went to the store and scanned Gerber, I found it very easy to use. And it's just reporting what's in there. So, mothers and fathers can make informed choices. Is that a big issue for the industry?
Yeah, if I could react just briefly. I am familiar with Maryland. They had a hearing, I guess, about 6 weeks ago. Bill hasn't progressed. We've been talking to the sponsor, but it hasn't progressed to date. I would say this, the distinction I'm trying to make is when your analogy is great, when you're in the store and you're hitting QR codes and you're making informed decisions for baby food. Okay. And so you could pick up a patch of applesauce and you could be like, here's what's in it. And there may be other things too. I don't even know, dyes or whatever. And you're like, well, I'm going to put that down. I'm going to go buy either another type of baby food or other fruits or whatever. Infant formula is the sole source of nutrition for an infant if you're not able to breastfeed. And so our concern is moms and dads have come to a point where they're buying infant formula. Most of them don't come to that easily. And so fast forward to a mom or a dad standing in a store with a canister of infant formula, and they see the word toxic on it, and they hit the QR code, and they can't rationalize really what. Most of them are just at that point finding out there's heavy metals in their infant formula. Okay. And so what we want to try to avoid is that mom or dad, where they're trying to buy the sole source of nutrition for their baby or for their infant, if they're unable to breastfeed for whatever reason. And we know that Most moms try to, and that's, God's nourishment for it, but for babies, but for whatever reason, millions of Americans can't. And so we want to avoid a mom or dad in a grocery store puts down that canister of infant formula because they're anxious about it now. And then they go buy almond milk, or they go home and they Google a recipe for some sort of infant formula, which we know doesn't have near the rest, because FDA tells us, what we need to put in infant formula for all the fat content and for the carbohydrates and the vitamins and everything. So that's given to us, given to the industry by FDA. And so when we create a situation where a mom or a dad gets really anxious and gets scared and goes and puts that canister down, they don't have another choice. Unlike the beech nut or the Gerber or baby food, or maybe food for an 18-month-old or a toddler.
So, if I may, sure.
Did you have a chance to finish responding?
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah, go ahead. And
So, here's the label, QR code of a Gerber, and it says, peace of mind you deserve, and check, meets our rigorous standards. And it just shows lead less than 1 part per billion, mercury less than 1, arsenic, cadmium, all less than 1 part per billion. And that's all it says. And I realize that ingredients change. And this field of carrots may be real low. And this field of carrots on the other end of town may be higher. But they test for that. And I'm sure the infant formula people do as well. They test their raw ingredients as they're coming in, as long as they're not manufacturing in Flint, Michigan, that it should be relatively safe all the time. So I don't see the harm in just having something clean and simple that people can QR code and look at and say it meets our rigorous standards. Or they could even, if they're all below the standards, they could put a label right on the packaging where they list the nutritional values, and then below that have a label that says, our rigorous testing for heavy metals, and we're below these threshold amounts.
Craig, if you're welcome to respond.
Yeah. Just briefly, that's a good question. I would say what you showed, I thought I really couldn't see it. I don't think is what is in the bill, because in the bill, it's you take batches, you put the actual specific, batch results online. And, I think what you may have been describing is like a check mark that you're good or whatever. And so I would say, when the biggest thing, I just can't stress enough, the difference between baby food and infant formula and the choices that moms and dads have. If you, and also my kids are a little older now, but, when a mom or dad finds formula that a baby or an infant likes and eats, that's golden, and it lets them sleep through the night or whatever. Like, we find it in our research, and we find it hard in our daily lives too. Like, you can't be moving back and forth between different formulas. If one may be a different testing one day. And to your point about ingredients, absolutely. We're mandated to do that under FDA, and mostly it's dairy. Our biggest component is dairy. So that's mostly what we're worried about. But we test throughout the whole cycle. A lot of folks obviously don't know that product will sit at our facility for up to 3 weeks, and we'll keep testing and we'll keep testing, and we'll test for other contaminants as well, not just heavy metals. But the packaging itself, like you were talking a little bit about, like putting stuff on packaging. The packaging is mandated and overseen by FDA as well on the federal level. And so when we change the packaging at all for any of our products, we have to resubmit to FDA.
Yep.
Because the contents of it are so important to keep the integrity of it. So but that's what we want. We want moms and dads to feel comfortable and to be comfortable taking formula off the shelf and using it. Because like I said, a lot of times they don't arrive at that decision lightly. And, we want to be a partner, obviously, with them and make it as easy as possible.
Representative Boston.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, the way you were describing just now, how, you know, a parent might take the formula off the shelf, see this is, you know, unacceptable levels, and then have no other choices. That just seems really unlikely in the current consumer market, where if you look at infant formulas, there are many, many types of infant formula. And the purpose of our bill is that you can know which of those types of infant formula, if you're a parent who is using formula for your child, have different levels of heavy metals. So if you find one that has a high level, you're not going to want that one. You try another one and it's going to be an acceptable level. And we actually had our colleague who's a sponsor for this bill. She's primarily a breastfeeding mom, but she supplements when she isn't breastfeeding. And so she actually went and checked the level of her formula that she had bought and realized she had the one she was using as a supplement was unacceptable levels of heavy metals. And
So that's the point
and
too.
she switched. So we would
Yeah.
like all Vermont moms to have the option of knowing that information, because many people don't know that. And I don't think it's that simplistic that it's going to be like, oh, one formula is high, therefore all formula is bad. The purpose is to tell them that there are many choices. This one has an unacceptable level. You might want to go look at a different one.
Well, I could say, first of all, unequivocally, our members will not put something on the shelf that is above international limits that they test under. So part of the thing is, like, when you talk about unacceptable levels, like, what does that mean? We all live under very stringent European Union standards that we test under. And so we don't put a product on the shelf that's not under those standards. Or depends on, Canada has some, New Zealand and Australia, but the European Union is the most stringent. And so what I'm saying is, infant formula, the choices are like baby food, which is what's regulated now in Illinois and Virginia and California and Maryland. It's just a total different animal than infant formula. We are regulated somewhat like a medicine. If you wanted to start a baby food company and you wanted to go convince the local supermarket that your product will sell, you can go put it on the shelf and do it. But infant formula, the recipe is scripted, the oversight is heavy, the testing for heavy metals when it comes into the plant with mainly our dairy ingredients and others is mandated and immediate and through the whole chain. And so we just, one of the reasons why I came here was just to sort of make the stark difference between making a decision with infant formula and making a decision, with baby food.
Greg, for those of us who haven't had a baby in the household or in our lives for a while, typically I'm thinking 6 months is the age that I remember a long time ago introducing more solid food. And I see somebody suggesting maybe that's too young, but again, I don't. So what's the typical age range for consuming formula?
Well, typically I think we say infant formula is up to 1 year old, but it probably depends on your decision with your pediatrician and where the milestones are, like where that particular baby's weight is and the head circumference is at a certain amount of time, and whether between you and your pediatrician, whether you're ready to move to something more.
Okay, all right. So for a year roughly. As far as I want to just be sure that we're all clear on who you're speaking on behalf of today, and we understand it's the industry. Is it how many participants, how many members are there in the organization, and what market share do they have? Maybe a way to ask.
Yeah. So our INCA consists of Abbott Nutrition, Mead Johnson, which has been making formula in the United States since the late 1800s. The Johnson part of Mead Johnson is one of the Johnson & Johnson brothers. And then the third member is Perrigo, and they make Perrigo. And they make all the store brands. Target, Walmart, if it's a store, a private store brand, they're going to make that.
So typically those are, if I were consumer for infant formula, I would probably be buying from one of those manufacturers, Abbott or Perrigo or Meadows.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're a large market, share. I would have to get back to you on the amount of other formula companies, but I would say maybe a dozen or so more that are smaller. And they might be more organic or something like that, although most of our members have organic lines as well. And then our members provide the specialty formulas. We haven't talked about that, which is important formulas, medical foods, basically for premature babies, is what they provide.
Representative Bartholomew next. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Curious, why do these companies use standards established by the European Union for sale here?
Yeah, the US doesn't have a heavy metal standard for infant formula.
That's kind of profound, I guess, because so many companies take advantage of that as an opportunity rather than.
I can only speak to our companies. Our companies take this very seriously, and they have for years tested under the strictest of international limits, which is set by the EU. In my testimony, I just mentioned that the FDA for several years now have been planning to set infant formula standards for heavy metals. During the previous administration, they introduced a program called Closer to Zero. And it is what it sounds like. It's an effort to get heavy metals closer to zero, because you're not going to have zero. It's going to be trace amounts. And so they started setting limits. They triaged it. They started setting limits for children and then, younger children. And then we think they're going to set a US standard in my testimony, there's this report coming out next month that is kind of like a precursor. It's going to be a study. You should know, all of our companies have been sharing data with the FDA for the last year in anticipation, and because we want a US standard. We want parents to know that there's a US standard. But in the meantime, we're testing under international limits and the most strict ones in the European Union.
So we heard just on the baby food question that the FDA sets action levels, which are just different from limits, and it doesn't mean that you can't sell the product with something higher than the action level. Baby food, talking about here. Do I have that right?
To be honest with you, I don't know much about baby food.
Okay.
Yeah. So I really would hesitate to speak about
Sorry
that.
to cut you off, John. Go ahead.
That's a question.
Oh, my other question was, it seems, if I'm understanding you correctly, what has you most concerned is the statement, toxic element testing, which, suggests, okay, there are toxins in here. I get that. So what would be a better way to phrase that?
That is one of our concerns that I absolutely outlined. Because toxic to us is there's going to be trace amounts of heavy metals. Obviously, the toxicity of something like a heavy metals depends on the duration of your exposure and the amount of your exposure. And so we know that our products are testing under European Union limits. So we think it's inaccurate, to your point, to call it toxic. We haven't really thought about that. I would just, caution just with using the word toxic, obviously, because it just goes sort of the narrative that I was talking about earlier. I've talked to many people over the last 6 months. When I've talked to them, that's literally the first time they found out there was heavy metals in infant formula or breast milk. They were shocked. And so, as you can imagine, a mom is in a store. She's got a canister. She figures out heavy metals are in it. She's like, what do I do? Heavy metals sounds really bad. I'm going to put that can down. I'm going to go grab some almond milk or something like that, which we know
Could be worse.
could be worse. Not only with heavy metals, but we know it doesn't have near the nutrition value that an FDA mandated and approved infant formula does.
I think we did hear in testimony that toxic heavy metal was an FDA expression, again, related to baby food. Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, thank you. This paragraph talks about the April 2026 addressing cadmium, mercury, and lead, but it doesn't include the it was a metalloid arsenic in that.
You mean in the anticipated HHS report?
Right.
I'm just kind of reporting that. I don't know what the justification was for which heavy metals that they looked at. It could be just another kind of, they picked the most important ones, the infant formula. But I don't really need, I really can't speak to it. Yeah.
Historically, on the baby food testimony, there were 4. They added the vocabulary word metalloid. It's arsenic. It's
Right.
It's a derivative of lead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Representative O'Brien?
So, like, I just wondered that, like you don't represent Gerber, for example. Like, Gerber's not part of your organization.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Or First Best Organic, is that?
I'm sorry?
First Best Organic?
Yeah.
So there are a bunch, I was looking at them, so I'm just trying to figure out, since you only represent 3, but a big market share, and you already test at the sort of, very stringent European standards, why would you not want to position this the other way and say, like, we do a better job than all our competitors testing? If there's a way to label it so you don't have your sort of scare problem there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it would be a chance for you in some ways to say, look, customer, moms and dads,
Yeah.
we do a better
No.
job than all the other competitors. We're the place to shop.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And obviously that's not the intent or sort of the scope of the bill. The bill is very prescriptive. It says you batch test, you put the raw numbers on a website, and then at some point you put a code on there. I think what you're talking about is more like, I'm old, like a good housekeeping seal of approval or whatever, some sort of indication on there. There are those that are available. Some baby foods companies do it for marketing purposes. But I just can't speak to, our companies may be looking at something like that, but that obviously is different than the very prescriptive language that's in the bill.
Representative Brigham?
So it sounds to me like there's no way you're not gonna get stuff in. There's no zero
Right.
for, and some mothers that are breastfeeding, they're drinking tap water, all this stuff. And some of those city water systems are wells really loaded with, those babies could be getting a heck of a dose compared to some of these formulas.
Yeah, obviously a mother's diet, and I really don't need to go off speaking about, mom's diets, but like a mom's diet does, determine, I am a dad, I remember that. A mom's diet does determine, the nutrition that is fed through breast milk to the baby, yeah. I'd say that delicately, yeah.
I think that I should just say for anybody who's listening in or wondering that we've had a discussion about including infant formula, but the language that we've looked at most recently and that the public might be looking at on the webpage excludes infant formula. So just wanted to be clear on that. And I think understanding and appreciating the concerns that you've raised so far, I did want to ask you about the testing requirement that is in the bill for baby food, and then would be if we remove the exemption for formula. That's testing that you're already doing typically, or would this mean additional testing?
Well, you mean under the description and the prescription that's in the bill? I don't know, to be honest with you. It's got a definition of like, what is an acceptable laboratory and stuff like that. We haven't been subject to this yet in the 4 other states. So I really can't speak to that other than I do know that because I hear from our members that the granular nature of the amount of heavy metals that are in infant formula, there has to be some very specialized labs that do that work because we're talking like, like a grain versus 700 grain of sand versus, I think, one of my, I think I read somewhere like a grain of sand versus like 700 pounds of sand or something like that. So the ability for a lab, this is what I can speak to do that kind of work, is it's not available all over. So it's very specialized lab work that has to be done. To get down to the granular level of the amount of heavy metals that are in infant formula, which is an interesting thing, but it's also a good thing because, again, our whole effort is to get it close to zero as we can.
Again, to the extent that you have this information, if testing is currently being done from, say, batch to batch, from time to time, how much variation might there be in, say, lead?
Yeah, I don't know. I will have to get back to you on that because I wouldn't even want to hazard to guess, but I can get back to you on that.
Any other questions?
Well, the one thing you gotta remember, we're talking about testing baby formula before it's reconstituted. So however it comes out of the human milk replacer factory is one thing, then how it's mixed at home is something totally different. And we can't hold them to the standard of reconstituted.
Are they all concentrates?
Boy, I don't know
Sorry,
if
what's the question?
Are they all concentrates?
No, that's the thing is there are a variety of different ways that consumers consume it. There's concentrate, there's sort of ready to feed, and then there's also, you mix it with water. And to tell you the truth, that's something that's really important too, that we try to educate moms and dads about is the sanitation of your kitchen or your counter or something like that, when you're obviously mixing it is a big deal too.
All right. While we have our witness, this is our chance to ask any other questions to better understand implications or the industry.
Just a quick one. So you mentioned earlier about like babies in NICU or premature. So are the companies you represent the leaders in sort of like colostrum replacement or the really early infant formula? And does that need different testing than later on? Just because babies, I would assume, growing, they need different nutrition at different points in their lives.
Yeah, that's all pre-approved by the FDA as well, for the right nutrients and growth elements that have to go into infant formula for a preterm baby or a baby that needs. I mean, it's literally characterized as a medical food. Yeah.
I'm glad you clarified or that you asked about concentrate because I was thinking, again, it's been a long time. I was thinking powder. So in these different ways that you might purchase it, what's the shelf life typically?
I think they vary a little bit, but I'll have to get, I can't guess on that. I'll get back to you on that. Because I want to be accurate on that.
And I'm thinking because the bill as currently drafted, anticipates some time for manufacturers to prepare. And obviously we wouldn't want to say, we would never do this, but we wouldn't want to say, as of tomorrow, that wouldn't be realistic. And if product tends to turn over, every 3 months, every 6 months, that would be helpful to them.
Yeah. And there might be some data on that with, some other states that have just done baby food. But I'll have to find that out.
And not expecting you to answer any baby food questions, so.
Right.
All right. Good. Well, I appreciate your coming in.
Okay.
And I'm not sure where you came in from, but again, thank you for making the trip.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do it. This is an important issue for us. Nutrition for infants is a serious thing and something that, a lot of folks just, they take for granted, that it's going to be there. And we are overjoyed that we're able to provide that to moms and dads who can't breastfeed or unable to breastfeed or adopt or whatever. And, y'all are going about a lot of issues. So I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk to y'all about it. Because there's a lot of information out there, and I just wanted to make the stark difference between baby food and infant formula. So thank you so much for y'all's time. I appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, appreciate your time too. All right, we will take a break. And we've got testimony scheduled again for, I think, for 2:30. Yes, so let's all try